Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Heritage Digital Academy webinar. Our programme is designed to support the development and resilience of small and medium-sized heritage organisations across the UK. And this consortium is led by Charity Digital and partnered with Dot Project, Media Trust, Naomi Corn Associates and the Heritage Alliance, with funding by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport through the Heritage Fund's Digital Skills Initiative. So welcome, just to let you know that if you want to sort of introduce each other or just say hello, then you can do that in the chat. And as we go through, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if you do have questions, just pop those into the Q&A. My name's Nicola, I'm from Dot Project, and I'll pass over to Helen from Dot Project now.
Excellent, thanks so much, Nick. And yeah, it's fantastic to be joined by you all today, really representing the breadth and diversity of the heritage sector within the UK. We know that we have different sized organisations attending today, but we really think that some of the methods and the tips that we provide are really actionable, regardless of your size or your confidence within this area. So my name's Helen, I'm a member of Dot Project, and I have a background in programme and project management, especially related to websites and digital product development. I've previously been head of partnerships for a website agency, so I hope that I can share some of my experiences with you all today. And I'd love to take the time to for my lovely host to introduce themselves as well. Annie, would you like to do a quick intro?
Hi everyone, lovely to meet you. I'm Annie from Dot Project. My background that's relevant here today, as well as I've worked a lot in different kind of agencies and software development companies, but also I've written a lot of briefs and commissioned a lot of partners to work on a whole variety of projects as well. So looking forward to sharing some insights with you around selecting different partners. Shall I pass to Chris?
Hello everybody, my name's Chris Charlton. I'm a long time IT type person. I've done it all, seen it all, as the grey hair probably describes. So I've worked with Dot Project doing this kind of thing and the training and generally supporting charities for probably the last 2 years or more.
Excellent, thanks Chris. Nick's also given herself a bit of an introduction as well. So we all work for Dot Project. We are a technology cooperative that guides teams to build strong organisational foundations for using technology to enable them and ultimately their sector to grow and to thrive. And our vision is a world where people and organisations can thrive collectively. And we come at this topic today wearing the hat of a digital supplier, but we also wear a lot of other hats as well. So a lot of our work with the not-for-profit sector and the heritage sector involves supporting organisations to select suppliers and to manage those relationships. So it's really good because we get to see this topic from lots of different types of angles. So we know where some of the challenging points are. And today we're going to be looking across the life cycle of digital partnerships. So Annie will be providing some excellent pointers on how to choose a digital partner and setting the relationship off on the right foot. I'll be providing some methods and tools that you can use to support your partner relationships and to get the best value for your heritage organisation. And finally, Chris will be taking you through some of the key ways to manage risk if you do decide to walk away from a relationship. So before we get into the session properly, I just want to clarify some of the terminology that we are using today. So what is it that we mean by a digital partner? So broadly, we're talking about anybody that isn't directly employed by your organisation who provides goods or services in relation to digital and technology. So this could include organisations, but it also includes individuals such as freelancers and contractors as well. And today we'll be mainly focused on service providers, but the methods and tips that we're showing can be are transferable across all different types of supplier relationships that you have. And you might be thinking, why would you bring in external support in the first place? Maybe you want your organization to develop skills internally. You might even want to be self-sufficient in some areas. So I think my kind of point to that is there will always be areas that you don't need to upskill in or have really specialist skills in-house. Because you'll either use them really, really seldomly, or you'll only need them for a really short space of time. So this could include things like website development, software programming, or even something like search engine optimization. So it's a good approach to bring in external specialist skills to support you. Alternatively, you might actually have some of these skills in-house already, but maybe your team are struggling for time or capacity. So you might want to bring somebody in short term, like a freelancer, to plug some of those capacity gaps. So those are some of the reasons that you might want to work with a digital partner in the first place. But before we get started, I'd like to do just a really quick poll, just to understand how confident everybody is feeling in some of these areas. So we're using a tool called Menti today that allows us to do some polls with you all. So if I'll just pop in the chat a link to Menti. If you'd like to click on that and let us know how confident you feel in selecting a partner, in managing a partner, and also in exiting a relationship as well. Just let us know in the chat too if anybody is struggling to access the link in any way. Perfect. So I can see people are getting onto the link and starting to vote. What we're seeing is slightly more confidence in selecting partners. So finding the right people to support and starting that relationship right. Slightly behind that, we have managing partners. And then finally, the area that people collectively are feeling least confident we see is exiting a relationship. Oh, starting to move. I would say that that's broadly aligns with kind of our experience at Dot Project of supporting organizations in these areas. I'm really not surprised that exiting a relationship is an area that people just aren't confident in. We really hope that this is something you don't have to do very often, as it can be quite time consuming and there's a lot of risk to manage in this area. So yeah, it's really great to get a sense of where the group is at today. So what I'm going to do now is hand us over to Annie, that's going to take us away for our section on selecting a partner and what you need to do.
Great, thanks, Helen. So yes, I'm Annie. I'm going to take you through the first part of the session today, which is around selecting a partner. I've seen there's quite a bit of confidence out there, so that's great. So I'm going to take you through sort of 5 steps for finding the right partner. Firstly, agreeing what you need and writing a brief, scanning the market, and then approaching and briefing potential partners, shortlisting and making a decision, and then finally getting started together. So firstly, agreeing what you need. Don't let someone do it all alone. Gather a team if you can and come together and agree the work that you want to get done. Involve anyone that might be a key decision maker and understand how you and they are going to make a decision and what your priorities are. For example, if you're commissioning or you want a new website, really important to get somebody involved who's involved in communications, even if it's a volunteer or a trustee or whoever's kind of involved more in that sort of communications piece. Use a template which will guide you through all the information that you need to provide, There are some great examples on a link that we're going to share here to Catalyst Dovetail, which has lots of examples of completed briefs. But also try not to skip any of the sections. They're there for good practice and to really help you through the process. And I guess finally, don't rush. There's a lot of kind of urgency sometimes that it feels around getting a brief out there quickly. But really what we've seen is that really good briefs are where people have taken time and really involved as many of you within the organisation to do that. So when you're writing a brief, really important to tell them about you. So tell them about your organisation, what you do and the services you provide, but really importantly, your audiences. So often we see just a link to an organisation when we're reading briefs, but really actually everybody wants to know what you do as well and how they might be able to support you and buy into your mission and what you do. Focus on what you need, not just a list of outputs that you want, but actually what's going to be success for you and what are the project goals, and describe the challenges and the priorities of your project. And I guess most important for me particularly is this clarity of budgets and timeline. When do you really need to start? How long really do you have to do the work? Do you have funding in place? And actually, what are your ballparks of a budget? What is your tolerance range of a budget? So often the budget is missed out of a brief, and it's really hard then for an agency or a partner or a freelancer to actually know where to start in terms of meeting your requirements. So please do put budgets and timeline in that brief. Add any, if there's specific technical requirements that might be appropriate for you to include. And then importantly, the sort of procurement processes and assessment criteria. Do you need to go through your board of trustees to get any proposals signed off, and how long might that take? So give an idea of that in the brief. And then finally, what you want to know from them. Do you want to get a sense of the types of clients they've worked for? Have they worked in the heritage sector before? Anything that's important for you to know that's going to help you make a decision. So next, secondly, is scanning the market. So understanding what different types of partners you're looking for. So I'm just going to talk through 4 sort of broad categories of partners. There are obviously a lot that kind of fall in between these. But firstly, digital agencies, and they're there fundamentally to accompany you in digital processes. So contributing their experience to ensure that you're making the right decisions around digital. And they will often have a lot of specialities as well. Typically, a digital agency will design and build websites or mobile apps or digital products. But some will also have quite a lot of specialisms around things like search marketing, digital fundraising, maybe even virtual reality or virtual tours. So each one will be slightly different depending on their size and depending on the people that work obviously within the agencies and the skills that they have. And secondly, we've got development companies, so software development companies who will support any sort of integration of maybe internal systems that you have, maybe particularly connecting your website, for example, to an online store or other systems that you have internally. But they may also specialize in certain types of systems like digital asset management or something like that. And thirdly, we've got the IT infrastructure and support. So these organizations will guide you in purchasing hardware, so laptops, digital screens, maybe audio guiding systems, but also software. And they may have certain specialities, so maybe point of sale systems. And it's less important that they understand your sector really, as the work is typically quite sector agnostic. But what is important when you're looking for this kind of support is their size. If you're a really small organisation, have they got experience of working with small organisations? Can they work to actually much, much smaller budgets potentially? And then the sort of all-in-one specialist services category here is there may be something very specific that you're looking for. It could be data management or data reporting, maybe cybersecurity support. These may be covered by a digital agency that you come across or an IT company, but sometimes there are highly specialized organizations as well. And definitely don't think you need to do everything for your project by one company. In some cases, there is a perfect match for you out there. But if you have any concerns, if some of your requirements maybe are quite specialist, you can bring others in. It just takes more time for you to focus and manage multiple partners. And finally, in terms of scanning the market is where to look and share. Really, I guess the first place is word of mouth. So ask other heritage organisations or charities in your area or networks. Ask your staff, trustees, volunteers if they've worked with good partners in the past or if they know of anyone. Maybe there's some particular projects that you really admire from other heritage organisations. Find out who did the work and approach them directly. There are various online networks. There's a particularly good one, Agencies for Good, which is a growing directory of about probably even 150 or so organisations now. And that's broken down into their day rates, their size, the typical sectors that they support. So that's a really good place to start. And there's also regional networks. So look at your regional heritage networks, maybe some charity networks. You might have a Tech for Good community locally to you, ask them if they know of anybody. And there are business networks as well, which often agencies and software companies will be part of. And then finally, there's always a LinkedIn and a Google search if you want to go a bit broader. And point 3 is approaching and briefing partners. So call around some different organisations that you've come across and just speak to someone, see if they've got interest in your brief. How does the call feel to you? Were they interested in the work that you might have for them? And this is a really good time up front before you even send them a brief, is to check the budgets that they can work within. And importantly, if they have capacity to take on your project, particularly if you've got really tight timelines. And once you send across the brief, provide a clear timeline for when you expect a response. Is it okay for them to ask questions ahead of submitting your proposal? And how do they do that? Do they just get in touch with you? Or maybe you just want to have an open session, which people can dial into. They can just do it on Zoom and people can ask their questions. So point 4 is shortlisting partners. Definitely always have more than one, even if it's just looking at freelancers and you might not be looking at a company as such. Try and talk to more than one person, but then no more than 3 to 4 to really focus your attention and ensure that you make the right choice. Focus on those that understand your needs and what you hope to achieve within your budget. And have they worked in the heritage sector before? Will they get you and your organisation? And a really good tactic is to have a proposal review matrix that you have internally, or just a document where you capture all the feedback that you've got from internally against the different proposals. But a good place to also capture any questions and queries that you might have to go back. Proposals come in all sorts of different formats, and some can be very long, some can be very short. This is a great way to just distill it into the key things that you want to have to make a decision. Particularly helpful in looking at breakdown of costs and understanding the different ways that proposals will be talking about a pricing model. And making a decision once you've started shortlisting your partners. Meet them again as often as you need and make sure that you do get all those queries answered. Understand what they want from you and what they need. Can you meet their dreams and expectations of working together? And do they understand yours? Do you imagine a good relationship forming with them, and how much you'll know how much they really want to work with you as well? And trust your instinct. Can you work with them? Prioritize what you need now, but actually go into every relationship or potential partnership thinking long term. Ask for some references and follow them up. And then the legal contract, understand every single clause in that contract and take your time. And I can't tell you how often we come across there not being any contract in place between a partner and an organisation who's commissioning the work. Really, really important to manage that relationship effectively. And finally, getting started. Take your time and don't rush. Take your time to get going. Initiate a getting to know each other session and establish how you're going to work together. You may find that you're actually working with a different team to the ones that you've come across during the proposal process. So make sure you get to know them, understand how you're going to communicate with each other and how you expect to keep in contact through the project. And this is a really important point in time to revisit that timeline. Has anything changed? Has the capacity and timelines of your partner changed? And have priorities for you changed internally? Or maybe staff changes perhaps that might impact the project? And allow time for discovery. It's really easy to rush this phase and feel that it isn't important because you don't get anything from it. But it is like recruiting someone to your team, and you need to show them who you are, how you work, and bring deep clarity to what you need. And if you really take the time in this discovery process, it will really help go faster once you get into the project. And then to summarize, if I was to give you one key takeout from choosing a partner, it would be time. A time to write your brief, to find the right partner, and this will all get you off to a great start. Thanks, Helen.
Cool. So we've left some time for questions. So yeah, I was wondering if any of our participants today would like to raise any questions through the Zoom Q&A for Annie and the rest of the team. And Nick, if you could let us know any questions that come through.
Just give it a minute or two, just give people a chance to talk. So someone is just asking about getting a copy of the presentation, and yes, absolutely, we'll be publishing links and things so that people can get hold of that at the end. So no problem there. We'll put that over to everybody.
Cool. So we'll leave you at the end of this webinar today for like any questions too. So yeah, if anything comes through, let us know. Should I move on to the next section, Nick, or has anything else come up?
No, nothing's come up yet, but I'll keep an eye on it and I'll collate them up at the end if anything comes through. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries.
Cool. So yeah, now you've selected your partner, job done. The hard part is over, or is it? So now it's on to working together and making the most out of those relationships. So when we work with charities and heritage organisations, we tend to see some quite common challenges when it comes to managing digital partners. And obviously there is a cost to this. So not only does it lead to a poor experience for your organisation, it can also be quite inefficient, and it means that you're not always getting the most value out of your relationships. So we have some simple steps that you can take to manage your partners more effectively. So the very first thing to do is to create an up-to-date picture of who your partners are and what their contractual responsibilities are as well. The second part is to develop a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities internally. So who from your organisation is managing that partner, who's looking after the contract, who's the day-to-day contact. And then finally, agree some routines and practices that you can put into place to effectively manage your technology partners and the tools that they are supporting as well. So the first thing is to understand who your partners are. This might sound really obvious, but often when we're working with organizations, this isn't always clear. So we regularly see organizations think that they have all of their partnerships and projects well known and established. But sometimes what we see, there's gaps in ownership, awareness, and also at times there's partners missing. So considerable risk to organizations. But it's also important to understand the measures of success and the scope of support. So if you take the example of a web development agency who you've engaged to in a support contract to manage your website, you need to be really, really clear on exactly what that means. Are they looking after your hosting? Are they looking after some of your subdomains? If your security certificate on your website expires, is this definitely their responsibility to fix? So knowing the scope of the contract ensures that you're always engaging with the right partner and you aren't asking your partner for things that they don't support, helping to make you more efficient in managing those relationships. It also helps you manage some expectations, and it gives a bit of a clearer picture on how you can manage success with your partner. So, for example, are you measuring how many hours of their time that you use? Are you measuring the number of support requests that you've raised each month, or the response times to those requests that you've raised? Also be looking at how are you using their services. If you're not making any use of their services at all and you're paying a support contract every year, that's also something to review. So by looking at all of the tools and services that you receive and your current list of partners, you'll get a really clear picture on whether there's any overlap and you have partners providing you with the same support, and where there's any gaps where that support does not exist. We'll come on to it a little bit later, but once this initial exercise is done, it's a really good idea to keep key partner details in a CRM if you have one, or at least make them visible to everyone in the organization. This makes sure that the key information is accessible and that all correspondence that you have with a partner isn't just held in one person's inbox, which means that other people can't access. So whilst you do this exercise of logging the key partner details, you might find that some of the metrics of how you measure success aren't clear. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a starting point for you, and it can serve as a really good opportunity to open up better discussions with them to get greater clarity on their responsibilities. So we can provide a template of how you can log these key partner details, but I'll show you what a completed example might look like. So what is important here about our fictional web agency, Amazing Web Agency? So we can see that they have a clear scope of what they do and what they don't do. So we know that if we need a new feature, for example, user forum, this isn't something that they will provide us within this contract and would need to be costed separately. We also know the maximum number of hours available to us and the support hours that they work. And we also have some clarity on their response times that we might expect. We also know that we've paid upfront, so we can plan our funding accordingly around the contract renewal date. And we've been able to identify that there's a 48-hour response time, where 48 hours is working hours, is actually far too long for us, and that we know that our key contact leaves shortly. So we'll need to facilitate some knowledge transfer and handing over of the account. So this is a good example of what you can create around your partner details. Although it's really basic information, it provides you a really good springboard to manage those relationships more effectively. So now you know what tools you're using and who's supporting. You also know who is responsible for managing the relationship in your organization, but it doesn't stop there. Now you need to understand how to get the most out of that relationship so that you can maximize your investment and build a really strong foundation for continuing to work together. So making sure that you're actively managing. And unfortunately, all too often, we hear from heritage organizations that they aren't getting the best service from their digital or their technical partners. And I'm just wondering for the group if any of these scenarios sound familiar to you. So you've had to chase for updates. What they've produced hasn't lived up to your expectations or met what they said they'd do in the proposal. Whether your key contact at the partner organization keeps switching, you don't know who's the best person to speak to, or whether you received an invoice for something and you don't actually know what it is for. So I'd love if everybody could go back on to Menti and get a bit of a sense as to whether any of these things have ever happened to you. So it's multiple choice. You can select as many as you want. Just find the link in the Zoom chat and let us know. Okay, so I can see some of the votes starting to come through. Chasing partners for an update on progress is something that we hear quite a lot. Not having something produced that meets your needs is also something we hear loads. I was in a training session the other week with a number of heritage organisations, and one of the things that we heard was that they felt that certain organisations, digital agencies, probably spent a bit more time on their sales process than actual project delivery. And that was really challenging for organisations to know the difference. So I think that comes back to Annie's point earlier around that due diligence and making sure that you get really good references. So yeah, I think we can see some commonalities here. The most common one is chasing partners for that update on progress. So thanks everyone for sharing. But on the flip side, in our experience of supplying services and working with charities and heritage organisations, we sometimes see the same issues happening from the client perspective. So yeah, wondering, is there any room for improvement? Have any of these happened to you? That perhaps your partner sent you a chaser email? You have maybe been sent a payment reminder email. Maybe you've cancelled a meeting at the last moment, but you knew that you had a conflict in place for a number of days beforehand. Or it's been hard to give a partner a straight answer because you're not sure who looks after a particular system within your organisation. So yeah, I'd like to go back to Menti again and just ask the question to you all. Is this something that you've done before? And this is an anonymous poll, so don't worry. This isn't about trying to make you feel embarrassed at all. We're all really busy people. Sometimes things get deprioritized and that's okay. But yeah, just would like to hear everybody's experiences. Give people a minute or so to answer. So that's quite interesting. We're seeing having to find out more internally about who owns specific systems. So yeah, hopefully the template that we'll be sending out about logging your partnerships will really, really help with that challenge that is faced. Just give another minute or so and we'll move on. So if any of these things have ever happened to you, there are steps that you can take, and our advice is to be a good client. And you might be wondering, what does this actually mean? So a digital partner relationship is no different to any other relationship that you have within your organization. You need to invest some time looking after it to get the most out of it. So what does that look like? The first one is around ownership. So make sure that you really own and value the relationship. It's about communicating with each other and taking the time to understand how each other works. You need to develop a common understanding of each other, your language and your terminology. This will really help in creating a shared roadmap. And we know that every sector has its jargon. The key is to ironing out the differences in those and in your heritage specific language and technical specific language as well. And to remember that you bring a huge wealth of heritage knowledge and your organizational specific ways of working as well. But your partner will bring huge technical knowledge on whatever system you have selected them to support. So it's about coming together and respecting those strengths and skills on both sides. The next one is to be responsive. So even if you can't answer someone's question immediately or get back to them, make it clear that that's the case and just set some reasonable timeframes and expectations about when you can get back. Again, it's all about that open communication. And then finally, remember that this is a commercial relationship and that you're paying them to provide you with a service. So this goes both ways. You need to make sure that you're getting value for money, but you also need to be really respectful of their payment terms as well. So the key thing is to make sure that you're up to date with all of your invoices. So once you're satisfied that you've taken the steps to be a good client and manage that relationship, there's some internal practices that you can use to build and drive improvement. So what we would recommend is coming together regularly as a team to discuss how your budget's being used, to discuss what's working well and what can be improved. As we sort of mentioned before, if you can, try and keep a central log of any of your communications, your meeting points and any actions that come out of managing the partner relationship. Try not to leave all of this sitting in one person's email inbox. So this is about practices internally to help you manage partners, but we'd recommend doing exactly the same, but alongside your partner. So have quarterly review meetings, really delve into how you're working together, how your budget's being spent, and if there are any challenges in the relationship, use this as a space to raise them. We have pulled together just a really simple framework that we like to use both internally and working with partners as well. So this can help drive some improvements to ways of working. You can do this virtually using an online whiteboard. You can also gather face-to-face, put Post-it notes up onto a wall. It's all about building a culture of learning and continuous improvement. So this really simple framework could be used on a quarterly basis, looking at a time period to think, what can we continue doing? What's working well for us? What are some of the things that are challenging that we should stop doing? How could we do some things differently? And what should we do next? So the key takeaways for me in terms of that partner management, it's always about communication. Keep the communication open, keep it visible, and be responsive. I think the next key one is about understanding and respecting each other's working patterns, but also your strengths and your skills. And then finally, just a reminder that to make a partnership a success, you need to be investing your time and your effort as well as money into making the relationship a success. And I'd like to pause us there and ask, if we had any questions or comments coming through in the chat.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of questions from the first section came through, which Annie has answered, but I'll just cover those quickly. So someone asked about partners and how many do you think we should approach before shortlisting? Annie, I don't know if you'd like to elaborate. Are you happy for me to just read that for you?
No, I can just answer that. I think it depends a bit about what your project is, but if it's, let's take a website, for example, I'd say no more than 5, but be as targeted as you can. And just be aware that if you do put your brief out there more widely, you may get a whole lot of different responses and how you're going to manage that. I did put in the answer, we did hear about one this week, that had 39 responses to a brief. So it's kind of bear in mind that that's going to take a lot to sift through and kind of make sense of where the good ones are.
Thank you. And then we also have the one which you also answered, which said, how do we ratify, which is a really good one, how do we ratify that people can do what they say they can do? We're not very technical, so how do we not get sort of bogged down in the details or bamboozled?
I just really urge you not to be afraid to ask, and ask several times to explain, particularly if you're dealing with something more technical. And you don't understand some of the language that you use, just ask them to explain, maybe write it down in different ways as well, and make sure the rest of your team understands as well. And in terms of like whether they can do what you want them to do, also speak to previous clients, look at case studies of the work they've done before, and you'll feel if they resonate with the work that you're expecting and want to have done.
Great, thank you. And then there was another one that came in that's the small church, and that they have that they're sort of tech limited and not always sure where to go, so quite often have picked one and then not quite sure if they're the right partner. And is there anywhere where they could go to sort of get a free trial, if you like? Is there any way to do a testing of a relationship before committing to a longer contract?
So I'll put a link in the chat as well, but a good place to start is a service called Digital Candle. I'll put a link into it in a second, where there's access to a few hundred volunteers as well. You can speak to somebody for an hour, maybe several times, and just ask and kind of clarify your questions there. And then I'd say it's down to the type of project you have as to whether you can do a free trial. It depends what you're trying to do. It's probably unlikely, but you can get a free trial of software if you're wanting to look at different ways of building a website, but probably less possible to kind of build up a partnership and have a sort of free period. But again, do that discovery process for as long as you need to do, and just get to know each other, and that's the way that you'll understand best if they can support you. But I'll put a link to the Digital Candle service as well, which anyone can access for free.
Thanks, Annie. There are a couple of more. I'll try and whiz through these just so we're okay for time. Someone's asked, is it any different when you have sort of zero budget? We have a partner we are currently interviewing who's aware of this, but when it comes to caring for them, should we handle it in the same way? So I guess that one's for you, Helen. So what can you do if actually you're struggling to find any time or budget to manage that relationship?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the first thing is about being really upfront with a partner, to let them know that you are time stretched, you are struggling with capacity, because often it's about not really understanding when people don't have the time. So yeah, the first thing is letting them know, trying to set aside as much as you can some time to do it, so you can be clear on the time that you can give and when. That'll go a long way to managing expectations on both sides.
Thanks, Helen. There's just a couple of others on here. So yeah, people are saying that about auditing, getting all the information, but actually they're not quite sure where their contract is, and how can they go about asking for that from their partner without making them think that there's something wrong or that they're trying to change partners.
Yeah, it's a good question. My experience of being a kind of partnership, if a charity or a client ever asked me for a copy of their contract, I would just think that they are following quite good practice in terms of managing it. I wouldn't be too worried at all if that was the case, that it was requested. I think, again, open and honest communication, just let them know why, explain the exercise that you're going through, and yeah, there shouldn't be any challenges or issues with that.
And then someone else did ask about that they don't really use their CRM for this sort of activity. You did mention it, and there are other places you can hold them. I can take that one if you like, which is that really, I think as long as you pick a point that everybody is aware of and you keep things centralized with the right people having access, it doesn't have to be in the CRM. So if you do have a shared drive or OneDrive or Google Drive or something that you're using where you store documents, create a separate area for your partners. and keep your documents and sort of correspondence and updates in that one place. It doesn't have to be a CRM. It's helpful if you've got one, but if not, just find a space that you currently use that's shared. Okay, I'll pop some, I'll type some answers in there as well, just so that people have got them. And that's where we are now. Thanks, Helen. So I guess that's over to Chris.
Chris, you're on mute.
Schoolboy error. Hello, everyone. So you've created a relationship, you've tendered, you've put the effort in to make sure that the relationship is to deliver what it is that you want. You've run that relationship, and it has to be stressed. You have to put the time into it. The worst relationships I've come across are where you essentially throw the contract over the fence and then have nothing more to do, and then are somewhat surprised where it doesn't quite deliver what you thought it was going to do. But anyway, the contract goes through. Hopefully it's going quite well. Now you're looking at exiting it. So yes, if you could page forward. So how you exit very much needs to depend upon why you're exiting. If you think about it, there's a few very reasonable ways and reasons why that might take place. So you might be exiting at the natural end of a contract, or a natural cutoff point, or end of phase one, or something like that, where everything has gone all right, but we've just come to the end of the contract. It could well be that the service has now been delivered, or it could well be for other reasons you want to go somewhere else. But if it's the end of the contract, quite naturally, you want to make sure there's some good behaviors there about how you do it. Then again, there's early termination. When you look at early termination, early ending a contract, there's two different reasons for that, and it's worth being very clear about that. One is a change in circumstances, and you want to go into that with one mindset to make sure that you can exit as positively as possible for both sides of the relationship. And then there's the at fault type situation. I come across this last. I'll talk about this towards the end, but this really needs to be looked at as a last resort. And there's a bunch of ways you can make sure that actually you can pull success from defeat, as it were. And that's really what you need to be doing. But if it does need to terminate, if there are good reasons for this contract terminating at fault, it's important that you consider and plan for that to make sure that you get the best from it. Okay, so moving on. What if it's a natural end of a contract, or it's a break point, or you're not renewing? There's a few key themes will come through here, which have also been expressed in the previous presentations. Communicate and plan. I mean, there should be no surprises on either side, and communication is particularly key here. If you want to get the best out of this relationship, and I'm talking about post the exit, you need to make sure that anything that should be an expectation is dealt with in advance. And by expectation, I mean things like, how are you going to actually close this down? Is there materials or ownership that you need to deal with? A key one here, and I'll put it in capitals so that you hopefully remember this and take this bit away from this section of the presentation, is things like passwords and accounts and other key materials, documentation, stuff like that. Make sure that you've got a plan to actually receive all of this stuff. Now, make sure you've got someone to receive it. Make sure you know what it is that you're getting. It isn't just an envelope of stuff that somebody then bungs in the bottom of a drawer somewhere and then forgets about. So do this proactively, understand what's going to happen, plan for it, have a conversation, make sure everything that needs to get done is actually done and done in a timely way. And one of the key things here is, after the end of the contract, then you're on goodwill rather than within the contract. And hopefully you are in a good position with your partner, but quite obviously, when you're working at in a sort of goodwill type position, their ability to do things and your ability to do things back becomes very much diminished, because you're now working on other things. And with the best will in the world, things get forgotten. So plan this in advance, communicate about it. And one of the key things you can do there is do a retrospective. I mean, this is an agile term, but what it essentially means is getting everybody into a room, getting everybody concentrating on the project, on the contract, on the engagement, and say, well, what went well? Yeah, learn from that. What went not so well? Learn from that. How would you improve things? What would you do differently? It's really well worth doing this so that you can become a better customer, but also to give feedback into your potential partners or your ex-partners now. And that feedback could be for them. How better could they have engaged with you? If they did things slightly differently, would there have been a renewal? Is it something as simple as cost or whatever, and you got a better offer elsewhere? That might seem a little bit sort of, you might be slightly discomforted to have that conversation, but frankly, they will appreciate it, right? And if it was something that could have been said some time ago, this is where communication becomes really important. And I'm a firm believer whenever you've got a contract like this, you certainly don't burn any bridges or anything like this, but is a reference worthwhile? A reference on both sides. This can be really important to both your potential your ex-partner, the ex-supplier here, but also to yourselves. This works both ways. Are you a good customer? And having that relationship clearly articulated via references, celebrate it. It's very worthwhile. And that gives you those opportunities potentially for follow-up down the line, or at least it makes the possibility to do that much clearer. Bit forward. So another point to work through, and this depends on your contract, are there any warranty considerations, especially if a thing was delivered that you'll then continue to use? The typical examples would be your website. So what happens if they've delivered your website or your CRM or your other system, and then at some stage in the future it breaks? Now, be very clear at this point when you're exiting the contract, that thing has been delivered, what various liabilities are with respect to this. And it is worth making sure you've got some kind of a warranty in place. I mean, and obviously that comes very much from your the initial contract setup, but understanding what the warranty implications are very important at this stage. It could have implications in terms of things like your accounts and your accounts management. If, for example, something breaks and your supplier is quite happy to go back into your system and fix it, do they have the accounts to do that? Are they able to get into your website and change it? So be very clear about what any possibility of follow-up work is going to be, right? Be careful about false promises, but remember, if you had a good experience from these guys, if they delivered what they said, right, that good suppliers are hard to find. Even if you find them, it costs work, right? So if you've already established relationships with people, think of the amount of effort you've already put into that. If you're going to do the same with somebody else, A, how do you know whether that relationship might work? But B, think of the amount of effort you've got to put into to make sure that you're talking the same language, have the same aspirations, the same understanding of how you interact with each other. So recognize how expensive that is, both in terms of time and potentially cost, and recognize that if you've got somebody you've already done that with before, it's well worth keeping them on if you possibly do that. Proactively build bridges. Where you are now might be your winding back involvement because of perhaps a budgeting issue, but that might come back in 6 months or a year. So proactively build bridges. You never know what will come down the line. If, on the other hand, you're talking about an early termination, well, there's two particularly obvious reasons why that might happen. One is a change of circumstances, no fault. We'll come to the at fault later. Now, this is perfectly reasonable. This happens. Let's face it. We've got a budget crisis. We can't afford what we thought we were going to do. Or actually, in terms of our supplier, the lead man needs to retire, or the supplier has gone bust for their own reasons. Or actually, that thing that you thought you needed, that offers refit, actually, you're going to drop your office because you don't need it anymore. Post-COVID, everyone's going to work remotely. The point is, change of circumstances just happens. Yeah, we've often got no control over it. It could be on our side or it could be on their side, but these things happen. to fret unduly about it, to raise too much fuss, the chances are it will have no impact whatsoever in the long term and would potentially just burn bridges. So if this is going to happen, communicate, right? And ideally, communicate as early as you can. If it's no fault, say so, but work collaboratively about how you might make the best of the situation. It could well be that the core contract that you'd aimed at being delivered to you, that may not actually in its whole be valid anymore, but parts of it might be. Yeah, so it could be a case of something like I'm going to have a support contract for a supplier, and they're going to support the websites, all my hardware, and something, and the CRM. Actually, because of changes to our circumstances or changes to their circumstances, all we want now is support of our hardware, our laptops and things like that. Communicate on this, because frankly, if you don't want this to turn into an early termination at fault, and then all the risks and costs that are associated with that, if everyone knows what the situation is, perhaps you can come to a sensible conclusion. But if you don't talk, you don't know. So if it is because early termination because of a change of circumstances, same as before, communicate and plan for the exit. Right? Be honest about it. At the end of the day, if you're honest about it, the chances are they'll be honest back, and you can make the best of what you need to get to. Unlike the no fault end of contract type thing, one of the things that you do need to be clear on, though, is any contract termination implications, continued license implications, hardware implications. Who pays for this stuff? Right? Who continues to pay for this stuff? If licenses have been bought, do you have any possibility of getting any of that money back? What options are available for you? And this is where that communications pays dividends early on. This is far more so than where you have a no fault end of contract type situation, but post termination, your leverage is very much reduced. I mean, depending upon the nature of it, if it's on the supplier side, that supplier may not exist anymore. So thinking about going back afterwards to get the documentation or getting the passwords or getting the licenses or whatever, it may just not be possible anymore. If it's on your side, it may well be that your change of circumstances has made it so that actually something is going to get completely mothballed. Now, if this is, for example, a website that you no longer need or a CRM that you no longer need, think carefully about this. You may not need it now, but what's going to be the situation in a year's time or 2 years' time? Is this stuff that actually you don't necessarily want to lose? So plan for it. Have that conversation with the supplier. Make sure where you can hand over materials, hardware, source code, passwords, accounts, all that kind of stuff, it takes place and you manage what you do with it. Make sure you deal with things like deletion of data and the return of hardware and all this kind of stuff. And again, do a retrospective. What went well? What did not go well? How could you improve? Could you do a reference? Is that worthwhile? If the relationship up to a point was successful, celebrate it. If there's a possibility to mothball things with the potential to come back later, and this happens more often than you might think, do so. Plan for it. Obviously, it depends on the circumstances. If this is a supplier problem, they're going bust, they're changing what they do, then they're having to put their prices up to a position that you can't afford it. You have to obviously manage what you do there to see whether, frankly, a mothball or something like that makes sense. But look into it and see what is possible, the art of the possible. As before, communication is absolutely the key. One of the things to watch out for here is if it is on the supplier side, they may well be apologetic. I mean, that might give you, frankly, some short-term leverage, a short-term opportunity. It may or may not be all or nothing. Would a renegotiation of the contract help? These are all things to look at. And as we've said, look out for, make sure you're after termination, your leverage is very much reduced, as I say. Make sure all of those things are done. What if, on the other hand, it's an at-fault termination? If there is some kind of a relationship breakdown, okay, we'll look into this. Communicate where you can, and if you can't because the relationship is broken, see if you can get somebody to mediate. Now, in my experience, I wouldn't want to say what the ratio is, but I think it's as often on the supplier side as it is on the client side where the relationships break down. And often there's good reason for that. You know, so the person, for example, who created the contract, got it working, that person has left. That left nobody there looking after the contract. Time passed, the supplier did some things, there was no one to talk to, and it all came tumbling down. You know, you find you're paying for stuff that you've no use for, you've no idea what it's doing, you've got nobody there who's engaged with the supplier. And you know, at the end of the day, it may not be your fault, but it is your fault because you haven't managed that relationship. Or it could be on the supplier side. You know, they've basically got no idea what they're doing. You know, they've overpromised, they've under-delivered, perhaps they have personnel issues, all sorts of stuff. But the key point is, it is going to be an awful lot more expensive to re-engage a new supplier, or potentially to throw good money after bad to close down this relationship, than it would be to recover it, if at all possible. So try and communicate. You know, that's got to be your first step. If you can't do it, as I say, get somebody else to mediate. Look yourselves in the mirror. Is this something that you as a customer as a whole has done? If that is the case, it may not be entirely your fault. You've just dropped the ball, somebody's left or whatever. Is this something that you can address? Can you consider a change in stakeholders? Were those expectations clear? Did those expectations change? Did your needs change? Look in the mirror, see what you can do there. Have they dropped the ball? Do they even know? Have you communicated with them? Did they think they were doing a good job but just missed expectations? Right? Again, communicate. At this point, you may need to check the contract. Are there options? Are there risks? Have you escalated? You know, does the management even know there's a problem? So many times, this all just becomes too hard, and communication becomes too fractured that people walk away and don't worry about or try not to worry about the mess that they're causing behind them. Where actually, with some communication, even if it's getting somebody in to help or to mediate, that could have all been sorted, or certainly done an awful lot cleaner. So if it is going to break down, plan for it. Remember, the supplier may well drag their feet. They may be unhappy about this. You may both be unhappy about it. There may be issues on both sides, but plan early. Understand what the contract termination implications are. Are you going to be continuing to pay licenses? Right? Are there licenses that have been set up in a standing order, for example, that if no one knows about it, you'll just continue paying? What about hardware? What about refunds? This is something that you may need to take some advice on, and you may need to fight your corner. So potentially take some wider advice. I know some links have been offered in the chat there. These are well worth looking at. Post termination, especially, your leverage has gone, right? Unless there is some nice person who works there, and you know that's down to luck as much as anything. Anything that's missing there, they've got no obligation at all to pass across to you potentially. So definitely make sure you've got all of the kind of materials that you're expecting, and especially in these kind of circumstances, things like passwords, accounts, and stuff like that. If you've got a CRM or a website that somebody put together, if you don't have the accounts and the passwords for that, and these are the master accounts, you might as well throw it away, because at some stage it will break and you will not be able to fix it, not without an enormous amount of effort. So absolutely vital here. Make sure you get those accounts if you need them. Also consider things like data and document deletion, GDPR implications. Make sure that they're addressed, because suddenly you're in a position where you may not be talking to each other. Consider also the risk and what happens next. If this is a thing that you say, well, I'm glad we stopped doing that, I'm going to walk away and never let them darken my door again, that's fine. But if this is, for example, a website or a CRM that you still need ongoing support on, then consider early what happens next. Who's going to support it going forward? What about licenses? What about existing commitments? If it's likely that you will try and transition that support contract to another provider, right? Perhaps it was at fault, it was their fault, and now you want to give it to somebody else, perhaps they're cheaper or something like this. Try and engage early, because if you've closed down a relationship with one supplier and then try and restart a new relationship with a new supplier, they will ask all sorts of sensible questions like, where's the data? Where are the accounts? How do I do this? Where's the documentation? It's a perfectly normal thing for a supplier to hand control to another supplier, and they should be able to do that sensibly, but they will only do that while the contract is still there, while they have some kind of a coverage, and they will hand it over to that new supplier and make sure that they're up to speed. But if the contract is finished, they won't, basically, not unless you're extremely lucky. So work out in advance whether you need to engage somebody else, even if it's a transitionary period, to keep the service running. As ever, plan early and communicate. So in summary, plan for exit, right? So there's no surprises on either side. Communicate when you can, and if you can't, see if you can get somebody else in to communicate for you. Manage handover ownership of materials as soon as you can, right? Plan for it early, not least to understand what they should be, so you can make sure that you're getting everything that you think. Understand cost and risk, especially things like licenses. You want to pay, you don't want to pay any more than you need to. You may need to pay licenses for the full year or something like that, even though you're not going to use them, if that's in the contract. But understand, see what the situation is, and see if there's anything that you can do there. If you don't ask, you don't get. And then consider, plan for what happens next. Don't just ignore it, because this is the only time, as you're going through that exit procedure, where you have got the possibility, at least, of having suppliers talk to each other or able to communicate.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chris. We're just going to finish our session today with a last Mentimeter. We know that this is an incredibly huge topic. It's really, really broad. And we've covered quite a lot in a short space of time today, but we'd love to know from yourselves whether there's anything that you would commit to doing differently as a result of what you've heard today. So if you'd like to go on to Mentimeter and just use the text box to enter in anything that you might change and do differently, and maybe that this is the basis for your retrospective sessions that you might want to do internally or with your supplier as well. Excellent. So we're starting to get through. The first one is, definitely really, really key. Those regular meetings with the supplier. If you're actively engaged in quite a big piece of work, definitely recommend weekly meetings. If it's more of an ongoing support, the key thing is that it is regular. So excellent point. More communication, actively manage that relationship, and I think that communication is really within your team as well as the partner as well. Absolutely, all information and communications is shared in an accessible area. I mean, this could be as simple as a Google document that your team has access to. And another excellent point there, looking to see whether contract exists, and if it doesn't, to get one created. You can do this in one of two ways. The partner that you work with will generally have standard contracts. You can ask to use theirs, or you can create your own. There's a couple of eventualities. And then, you pay more attention to contract clauses. Perfect. Thanks everybody for sharing that. We'd just love to, wrap up the webinar with any further questions that people have. I'll pass it over to Nicola.
Thanks, Anne. So I think there's a couple that have that I'd just like to pick up on when I've looked at some of the answers or answered some of them. And I think I've misunderstood one of them, and I'm just going to reframe it, which is, I think what someone's asking is, I have partners that actually are pro bono, so they're doing it for us for free. And with those partners, you know, what can I do to sort of maybe do something around contracts to make sure I know what it is that they're covering and make sure the scope is right, and also do I put the same time and energy into that relationship, given that it's a free relationship? So it's a bit of a different shape. I don't know if anybody on the panel's got some input for that.
I think the question is, how important is this to you? If this is something that's done casually and there's a little bit of work is done on a very ad hoc basis and it's not critical, then fine, let it continue as it's going. But anything that's even slightly important to you, you need to be keeping in contact with them, you know. So communication doesn't necessarily mean talking every day, but it needs to be sufficient to manage your risk, to make sure it's being done in the right way, to manage expectations. If this is pro bono and the person's clearing off on holiday to Spain for 3 months, how much does that affect you? If you don't communicate, how did you know it was going to happen? So it's just useful to keep in contact with each other. And I think just as much so for a pro bono or a volunteer or anything else like that.
Thanks,
I would just also add to that, even if it's just a one-page kind of clear understanding of what it is that you're doing together, will just really help. If you can't put a contract in place, still have something that's a kind of understanding of this is what you're doing and how you're doing it.
And probably also, I mean, more importantly, what they're not.
Yeah.
So that just to make sure that you don't have any misalignment between what you think they might be doing and they're sort of saying, no, that's not our agreement. I don't look after that bit. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good tip, to just have something that lays out that we definitely do this, but we absolutely don't do that. I don't think there's any other open questions at the moment. There was a question about passwords. I know that you answered that, Chris. Would you like to just elaborate? Someone asked, how do they safely pass the passwords over? Because you said about giving that information.
However is convenient, really. If it's an email, make sure you change the password. But one of the things I'd also suggest is that whenever someone gives you the password, you then log in and use them and change them. And this does two things. One, it makes sure that you have it, you're owning them yourselves. But the second thing is making sure that the password that they gave you is correct. I've come across numerous occasions where it was best faith, they thought they were giving you the password, but they didn't realize it had changed. And now, if you try it and you can't get it to work, or maybe you were at the wrong website, so you didn't work out how to change the password correctly, now's at least a time we can have a quick conversation. If, on the other hand, you take that envelope and it's got the password, they counter the password details on, and then you ignore it for the 6 months until you actually need it, and then it doesn't work, then you're in trouble. So whatever you do, when you get it, validate, you can log on, make sure you understand what you're doing, and then change it so you've got it and you take ownership of it.
And there was one as well that was around if you're having a partner like rent to handover, do you have to pay for both of them, or what happens with that? When there's... It
depends what you mean by for a whole year. I would really hope not. It is worth recognizing and paying, and this is an investment. It isn't just a cost, it's an investment. Paying for a period of time to get the new supplier up and running, if this is a relationship that you want to do. If this is important to you, whether it's ongoing support or creating that website or supporting your CRM, it's worth that investment for a short period of time. And I'm talking about the period of a few weeks, if necessary, to make sure that they can support it better. Because if they, typically for a contract, you will say, well, it'll take them for a handover type contract, it might take them 3 months to get up to speed. Right, and if you look at the contract, they've got limited liabilities for that first 3 months until they understand what's going on. If, on the other hand, you can do some kind of a handover, then you can reduce that 3 months right down. So it is worth looking at it and seeing whether it's worth their while, worth your while investing in that and paying twice, but only for a period of a few weeks to get them up to speed. And where we're talking about paying twice, as it were, this should be just for the supplier. It shouldn't be for things like accounts, licenses, and all that kind of stuff. So you'd expect those to transfer across.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's it for the Q&A, and I think we're at full time. Helen, anything to add?
Only thing to add from me, just thank you all for attending today. We are still providing a number of upcoming webinars in May and June related to copyright and data protection from Naomi Corn Associates, and a number of webinars from our other learning partners, Media Trust as well. So keep an eye out for future courses and events, and otherwise thanks very much. We will get the slides and the templates as well as the video once this is ready sent to you all. And yeah, have a lovely rest of the day.